My name is Steve Hellenga. I am with Hope Reformed Church in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and we have recently used the services of a transition pastor, and I'm here today to speak a little bit about that experience and some of the steps that we walked through as far as making sure that we're calling the right pastor. Just a little background, the pastor that we had been with us for 13 years. And our church has been very fortunate in that the past 25 years, we've only had to call 2 pastors. So this whole process of having to call a pastor was somewhat foreign to us. We haven't had to do it, and we realized that it has changed, but we didn't know how that changed, and we needed the expertise of someone to come in and walk us through the steps. And it was extremely eye-opening as we began this process. Our church is about 70 years old. It started as a Sunday school church, and it's a neighborhood church. We decided about 20 years ago that we were going to stay a neighborhood church. We weren't going to go to a big mega church. We were going to stay a neighborhood church and serve the purposes of our neighborhood. And so the first thing that the transition pastor did for us was to really take a look at who we are and are we serving what we called our mission to be. And it was very enlightening to find out that, geez, we probably really weren't. The first thing we looked at was the demographics of our church. What did our church look like compared to what our neighborhood looked like? And the reality is our church was a lot of white people that were of Dutch descent, and that was growing older. Whereas the community that we served in was much more diverse, was much more smaller families, was much more younger families. And so when we take a look at, was our church, which was supposed to be a neighborhood church, was it really being a neighborhood church to the neighborhood? And we found out we weren't. And so we had to take a real look at programs, traditions, things that we were doing that really was not allowing us to be that neighborhood church. And the transition pastor was able to assist us. We come with our own emotions, our own traditions, our own feelings as to how things should be, because after all, we've been in the church forever. We know how to play church. We know how to do all this stuff. But to the outsider, what does this look like when we're trying to attract somebody? And transition pastor came in was very unbiased, was very objective, stayed very much on track, avoided our traditions, and basically came with a clean slate. The first thing that the transition pastor did was to create what we call the transition team. The transition team was tasked with these 5 things here. The first was to identify and solidify what was our bedrock beliefs. What are those things that we believe that were non-negotiable? As an example, our church, we believe that salvation is only through the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That is one of our firm bedrock beliefs that we have. And so we listed what are our bedrock beliefs? What do we believe? What is non-negotiable? We then identified what our core values were. What are those things that really make us strong as a church? We're very friendly. We're a very outgoing church. And so that was one of our core values that we had. The third thing was to try to define the difference between what is theology and what is methodology. We had a lot of things that came, programs that were basically tradition type things. And we had to take a look at, okay, are those, is that theology, or is it just because that's the way we've always done things? And so that was really pretty eye-opening to us in doing that. The next was to write a mission statement. What is our mission? What is God's purpose for us in this community? So we wrote a mission statement. And then finally, they wrote a vision statement. We got this mission. It's on paper. How do we live into that? How do we make sure that we're staying on track and what we are doing is in accordance with our mission. So that was the first step. The transition team worked a long time in doing this, but the transition pastor was able to walk us through that. The next was, of course, to get leadership buy-in. We brought all of this to the consistory. The consistory had to validate our bedrock beliefs that the transition team came up with. They had to support, adopt and support the mission and the vision statement. Again, not just words on a paper, but really adopt it and live into it. Formulate a job description for the new pastor, and then create a search team guidelines. What are the things that we are looking for within a pastor? One of the things for our particular church, since we had found that we really were not living into our calling to be a neighborhood church, was we wanted someone who had some real experience in revitalizing churches. And so that was, one of the guidelines that we gave to the search team was we want someone with experience in church revitalization. After that, we then created the search team. Now the search team has actually been already formed. They did some demographics of the church. They did a profile of the church. So they were doing a lot of behind the scene things, but once we got all of this done, we were able to give that to the search team, and then they, of course, did their thing. They went out and sought the pastor that met the criteria that we had set. And all through this, we also had to keep the congregation informed. Again, our congregation was an older congregation. It was kind of like, and we hadn't called many pastors in the past 25 years. And so their idea was, okay, it's you bring in 3 guys, you have them preach, and you basically take a vote as to who you like the best. That doesn't work anymore because we needed someone to live into our vision and into our mission. And so it was a really long process, but one that really caused us to take a look at ourselves. Who does God want us to be? Now the result of all of this was a very fruitful ending. We did call a pastor that met the criteria, that lives into our mission, lives into our vision, validates our bedrock beliefs. So again, if you are going through a time when you have a vacancy with the pastor, I would strongly recommend that you use the services of a transition pastor. Again, they're going to come with an unbiased opinion, unlike us members who have our own emotions tied into it. They're unbiased. They're going to be objective. They're going to keep us on track. They're going to avoid all of our traditions. And they're basically going to come with a clean slate, say, where do you want to be? And how are we going to get there? Thank you.